The morning shift alarm rang across the mining colony of New Harmony as it had every day for the past 10 years. Veltar stretched his long blue arms and checked the daily reports on his datapad. The Xanthari administrator had grown comfortable with the routine of managing the crystal extraction. Operations on Kepler 442b today looked like any other day. 3 kilometers below the surface. Chief Engineer Kesara was already deep in the tunnels with the mining crews. The Xanthari had built an impressive network of passages and chambers to harvest the valuable energy crystals that powered their civilization. The crystals formed naturally in the planet's core, and this world had some of the richest deposits they had ever found. The morning crew consisted of 347 workers, spread across 12 different tunnel systems. Each tunnel had its own safety protocols and monitoring equipment. The Xanthari took pride in their advanced mining technology that could predict cave-ins and structural problems. Days before they happened, Kesara was checking the readings from Tunnel 7 when she noticed something strange. The geological sensors were showing microtremors that did not match any pattern in their databases. She called her assistant Morden over to look at the data. "These readings are unusual," she told him while pointing at the display. "The tremors are coming from below our deepest level. That should not be possible." Morden studied the information and shook his head. "Maybe the sensors are broken. We should run a diagnostic check." Before Kesara could respond, the first explosion shook the entire tunnel system. The lights flickered as emergency alarms began blaring throughout the complex. More explosions followed in rapid succession, each one stronger than the last. The carefully carved walls began to crack and crumble. "Cave-in protocol now," Kesara shouted into her communicator. "All crews to emergency positions." But the system was failing faster than anyone had planned for. The supporting structures that had held for a decade began collapsing like dominoes. Tunnel after tunnel filled with debris as the mining crews tried desperately to reach the surface elevators. On the surface, Veltar felt the ground shake beneath his feet. His communication system lit up with emergency signals from every tunnel in the mine. The main display showed red warning lights spreading across the entire underground network like a disease. "Kesara, report," he called into his communicator. Static answered him for several long seconds before her voice came through, weak and broken. "We have major collapse in sectors 3 through 9. Many workers are trapped. The gas levels are rising fast." Veltar ran to the emergency control center, where other administrators were already working frantically at their stations. The disaster was worse than anything they had ever planned for. Their rescue equipment was designed for small cave-ins affecting maybe 20 or 30 workers. This was affecting hundreds. "How many trapped?" he asked the rescue coordinator. 347 confirmed trapped across 7 different locations. "We lost contact with Tunnel 7 completely. The automatic sealing system activated to prevent toxic gas spread, but that means anyone in there cannot get out." The toxic gases were the worst part. The planet's core produced deadly fumes that normally stayed deep underground. The explosions had opened new cracks that were allowing the gases to rise into the mining areas. The Xanthari had breathing equipment, but it was only good for a few hours at most. Veltar checked their rescue capabilities. They had emergency digging equipment, medical supplies, and breathing apparatus for maybe 50 people. The nearest Xanthari colony was 6 months away by their fastest ships. Even if they sent a distress call immediately, help would never arrive in time. "Can we reach any of the trapped workers?" he asked. "We made contact with groups in tunnels 4 and 6. They say the air is getting bad fast. Maybe 6 hours before it becomes deadly. Tunnel 7 still shows life signs but no communication." Veltar stared at the display showing 347 red dots representing his people trapped underground. Each dot was someone he knew personally. This colony was small enough that everyone knew everyone else. These were not just workers, they were friends and family members. The rescue teams were doing everything possible, but their equipment could only clear small amounts of debris at a time. At their current rate, it would take weeks to reach the trapped workers. The toxic gases would kill everyone long before then. Sir, we need to consider other options, said his assistant Zephyrin. What other options? Veltar asked, though he already knew what she was thinking. The emergency broadcast system. We could send a general distress call into space. Veltar had hoped to avoid this option. Zenthari had never made official contact with other species, though they knew others existed. They had heard stories about various alien civilizations, some peaceful and some dangerous. Sending a broadcast into space was like opening their door to strangers, and they had no way to know who might answer. What do we know about other species in this region? He asked. Zephyrin pulled up their limited database of information gathered from long-range sensors and intercepted communications. There are at least 5 different civilizations within communication range. The closest appears to be something called humans. They seem to have colonies about 30 light years from here. What do we know about these humans? Very little. They appear to be from a high-gravity world with dangerous conditions. Some reports suggest they are surprisingly helpful to other species, but they also seem to have very advanced military technology. Veltar looked again at the display showing his trapped people. The life signs were getting weaker as the toxic gases continued to spread. His rescue teams had managed to clear only a few meters of debris in the first hour. Prepare the emergency broadcast system, he decided. Make it simple. Mining accident, hundreds trapped, need immediate medical assistance and rescue equipment. Include our location and basic information about our physiology. Are you sure about this? Zephyrin asked. Our people are dying. If there is any chance that someone out there can help, we have to try. The message was prepared and transmitted on all available frequencies. It was a simple plea for help sent into the vast emptiness of space. Veltar had no idea if anyone would even receive it, much less respond. But as he watched the life signs of his trapped people growing steadily weaker, he knew it was their only hope. The broadcast traveled at light speed toward the human colonies, carrying with it the desperate hope of 347 trapped miners and everyone who loved them. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison was finishing his 3rd cup of coffee when the alarm systems at Luna Base Monitoring Station began screaming. The night shift was usually quiet, with most of the activity being routine traffic control and communication relays. But this was different. The main display showed an incoming transmission on emergency frequencies, and the computer was already working to decode the alien language patterns. Jake had been monitoring space communications for 8 years, but he had never seen anything like this. Computer, analysis of incoming signal, he called out. Unknown language detected. Pattern recognition suggests intelligent origin. Attempting translation using linguistic database protocols. Jake watched as the translation software worked through the message. Slowly, words began appearing on his screen. Mining accident. Trapped workers, toxic environment. Medical assistance. Needed. The coordinates showed a location 30 light years away in a system they had cataloged but never visited. Holy shit, Jake muttered, then caught himself. This was a first contact situation, and he needed to follow proper protocols. Immediately, he activated the emergency communication system and sent an immediate alert to Earth Defense Command. Admiral Susan Blake would need to see this right away. The message was tagged with the highest priority classification and transmitted to Earth. Using the quantum communication array on Earth, Admiral Blake was reviewing fleet deployment reports when Jake's message arrived. She read through the translated alien distress call twice before activating her command staff emergency protocols. Get me Captain Foster, Dr. Chun, and Colonel Wagner immediately, she told her aide. We have a Code 7 situation. Within minutes, her senior staff was assembled in the command center. Blake displayed the alien message for everyone to see. First contact scenario with humanitarian crisis, she announced. Unknown alien species, mining disaster, hundreds trapped, requesting medical assistance. Captain Ryan Foster studied the message carefully. As commander of the carrier Washington, he would likely be leading any response mission. What do we know about this species and their capabilities? Nothing, Blake replied. But look at the details again. They mentioned trapped workers in a toxic environment. The language pattern suggests they are under severe stress. This could be a natural disaster, but it could also be something else. Dr. Lisa Chun, the fleet's chief medical officer, raised her hand. The mention of toxic environment concerns me. Are we talking about chemical contamination, biological warfare, or something else entirely? That's exactly why we need to assume the worst-case scenario, Blake said. We're looking at potential chemical weapons, possible hostile occupation, or a disaster so severe that it overwhelmed their own response capabilities. Colonel Pete Wagner, head of the engineering corps, was already thinking about logistics. If we're going in blind, we need to be prepared for anything. Unknown alien physiology, unknown environmental hazards, potentially hostile forces in the area, Blake nodded. Exactly. This is a Protocol 7 situation. Humanitarian intervention. With force projection capability. Protocol 7 was something the human military had developed after decades of disaster response on Earth. Natural disasters were rarely simple on Earth. Hurricanes brought flooding, infrastructure collapse, and often civil unrest. Earthquakes triggered fires, toxic spills, and sometimes international tensions. Volcanic eruptions created refugee crises that could destabilize entire regions. Human emergency response doctrine assumed that any disaster was potentially a complex, multi-layered crisis requiring military-level resources to resolve properly. When humans responded to disasters, they brought overwhelming capability because experience had taught them that anything less was usually insufficient. What assets do we deploy? Captain Foster asked. Blake pulled up the fleet deployment screen. Full humanitarian response package. Washington as command and control, destroyers Lewis and Clark for system security, medical ships, Hope, Mercy, and Compassion for casualty treatment, and the engineering vessel builder for heavy construction work. That's a lot of firepower for a rescue mission, Dr. Chun observed. It's a lot of capability, Blake corrected. We don't know what we're walking into. If this is a simple mining accident, we'll have more help than they need. If it's something more complicated, we'll be prepared. Colonel Wagner was already calculating the engineering requirements. Unknown geology, unknown mining techniques, potentially unstable structures. We'll need the full excavation package, atmospheric processing, equipment, and emergency habitat construction capability. Medical requirements? Blake asked Dr. Chun. Unknown alien physiology means we need our full xenobiology lab setup. Unknown toxic environment means hazmat protocols and decontamination facilities. If we're talking hundreds of casualties, we need field hospital capability with surgical suites. Captain Foster looked at the deployment list growing on the screen. This is essentially a small invasion force. It's a complete response capability, Blake said firmly. When human lives are at stake, we don't go in halfway. And if we're making first contact with a new species, we want to make a good impression by showing them we take their emergency seriously. The human perspective was shaped by Earth's harsh environment. On Earth, when someone called for help, you brought everything you might possibly need because you rarely got a second chance. Human rescue protocols assumed that the situation was worse than initially reported, that complications would develop, and that having too much capability was always better than having too little. Timeline for deployment, Blake asked. 6 hours for full fleet preparation, Captain Foster replied. The Washington battle group is currently on ready status. Make it 4 hours, Blake ordered. Those people are dying while we plan. The next 4 hours saw a flurry of activity across the human fleet. The Washington's crew loaded emergency response equipment alongside their normal military supplies. The medical ships prepared for unknown alien physiology by bringing their most advanced diagnostic and treatment systems. The builder loaded construction equipment capable of moving mountains. Dr. Chun assembled her xenobiology team, including specialists in alien medicine, atmospheric chemistry, and biological contamination. Protocols. They would need to figure out alien biology in real time while treating potentially hundreds of casualties. Colonel Wagner's engineering teams loaded excavation, equipment designed for disaster response. Their gear could clear avalanches, stabilize, earthquake damage, or build emergency shelters in toxic environments. They prepared for the worst possible conditions, because human engineers had learned that disasters were usually worse than anyone expected. Captain Foster reviewed the tactical situation one more time before departure. His ships were heavily armed, because human military doctrine assumed that anyone capable of causing large-scale casualties might also be capable of threatening rescue operations. The weapons weren't for conquest, they were for protecting the rescue mission. "All ships report ready for departure," his communications officer announced. "Admiral, this is Foster. Fleet ready for humanitarian deployment." Blake's voice came back. "Immediately. Approved. Proceed to alien coordinates, maximum speed. Good luck, people." The human fleet engaged their faster-than-light drives and disappeared into hyperspace, carrying enough firepower to level a planet and enough medical supplies to treat an army. To the humans, this was a standard emergency response. They had no idea that to alien eyes, they would look like an invasion force. As the ships traveled through hyperspace toward the distant alien world, none of the human crew members realized they were about to create one of the most significant misunderstandings in galactic history. The human fleet's arrival at the edge of the Kepler 442 system created gravitational distortions that registered on every sensor array within 100 million kilometers. Veltar was in the emergency command center desperately coordinating rescue efforts when his communications officer Nexville suddenly went rigid with fear. "Sir, we have multiple massive contacts dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge," Nexville reported, his voice shaking. Veltar looked up from the rescue status reports. "How massive?" "5 contacts, each one larger than our biggest colony ships. The lead vessel is nearly 2 kilometers long. They're all heavily armed." The main display switched from rescue operations to the incoming fleet, and Veltar felt his heart sink. These were not rescue ships. These were warships, bristling with weapon systems that could reduce his entire colony to ash. The largest vessel alone carried more firepower than the entire Xanthari defense fleet. "Did we receive any response to our distress call?" Veltar asked. "No, sir, they just appeared and began moving toward our planet." Down in the collapsed tunnels, the situation was becoming desperate. The rescue teams had managed to establish communication with trapped groups in 3 locations, but the toxic gas levels were rising steadily. The trapped workers were reporting difficulty breathing, and several had already lost consciousness. Veltar faced an impossible situation. His people were dying underground while what appeared to be an invasion fleet approached from space. Had their distress call been intercepted by hostile aliens, who saw their weakness as an opportunity for conquest? The human fleet moved through the system with military precision. Captain Foster established a communication channel and began transmitting what he considered standard first contact protocols. "Unknown alien vessels. This is Captain Ryan Foster of the United Nations ship Washington. We received your emergency transmission and are responding with full humanitarian assistance. Please acknowledge and provide landing coordinates for our emergency response teams." But the translation systems on both sides were not perfect. The human military terminology came through as aggressive and threatening. Words like full response, translated as complete deployment and emergency teams, became assault forces in the Xanthari language database. Veltar heard what sounded like a military commander announcing the deployment of assault forces to his planet. The massive alien warships were already launching smaller vessels that appeared to be troop transports and fighter craft. "They're launching attack craft," Nexville reported. "Dozens of them heading directly for the colony." Veltar activated the colony's emergency alert system. Sirens began wailing across New Harmony as civilians evacuated to underground shelters. The irony was not lost on him that they were hiding underground while their own people were trapped underground by the disaster. Captain Foster was confused by the aliens' behavior. His sensors showed the colony going into what appeared to be defensive positions, but they had sent a distress call asking for help. He tried again to establish proper communication. "Alien colony, please respond. We are here to provide emergency medical assistance and rescue operations. Our medical teams are prepared to begin immediate treatment of casualties. Again, the translation created problems. Medical teams came through as interrogation specialists, and immediate treatment sounded like immediate processing to the Xanthari translators. Dr. Chun was preparing her medical teams aboard the hospital ship Hope when she noticed the communication difficulties. Captain, I think we have a translation problem. They seem to think we're hostile. How is that possible? We responded to their distress call. Their language uses different grammatical structures. Our military protocols are probably coming across as threats. Colonel Wagner was having similar problems with his engineering teams. His requests for geological surveys and structural assessments were being interpreted as reconnaissance for military targets on the planet's surface. Veltar watched helplessly as the human dropships approached the colony. Each transport was the size of a Xanthari cruiser, and they were heavily armed. To his eyes, this was clearly a military landing operation disguised as a rescue mission. Should we resist? Asked his security chief Termaven. Veltar looked at the tactical display showing the overwhelming force approaching his colony. The humans had enough firepower to destroy every Xanthari ship in the system without taking damage. Resistance would be suicide. No, we cannot fight them and our people. In the tunnels, we'll die if we do nothing. Maybe they really are here to help. The first human dropships landed near the mine entrance with the thunderous roar of military-grade engines. Marines in powered armor emerged from the transports, their weapons ready and their movements precise. To the watching Xanthari, they looked like conquerors claiming new territory, but Sergeant Amy Rodriguez and her team were simply following standard disaster response protocols. The powered armor was for protection against unknown environmental hazards. The weapons were for clearing debris and dealing with potential structural collapses. They moved with military precision because they were military personnel, but their mission was rescue, not conquest. Perimeter secured, Rodriguez reported. Beginning assessment of rescue site. Her team immediately began deploying equipment that the Xanthari had never seen before. Massive drilling machines materialized from the dropships, along with atmospheric processors, emergency medical stations, and communication arrays. The humans worked with the efficiency of a military unit because that's what they were, but every piece of equipment was designed for saving lives. Not taking them. Dr. Chin landed with the second wave of transports, bringing mobile surgical units that could function in any environment. Her medical team set up a field hospital that was larger and more advanced than the colony's primary medical facility. Multiple casualties with unknown physiology and toxic gas exposure, she reported to the fleet, setting up decontamination protocols and emergency treatment stations. The Xanthari watched in amazement and terror as the humans deployed resources on a scale they had never imagined. The alien medical facility appeared to be larger than their entire mining operation. The construction equipment looked capable of moving mountains. Veltar finally worked up the courage to approach the human commander. He walked slowly toward the landing site, trying to appear non-threatening while his entire body shook with fear. Sergeant Rodriguez spotted the approaching alien and immediately shifted to first contact protocols. She lowered her weapon and activated her universal translator, hoping it would work better than the ship-to-ship communications. I am Sergeant Amy Rodriguez of the Human Rescue Team, she said carefully. Are you the colony administrator who sent the distress call? Veltar was surprised to hear relatively clear translation this time. I am Administrator Veltar. You came to help our trapped workers. That's correct. We brought everything we might. Need for a major rescue operation. How many casualties do you have? 347 trapped underground. The toxic gases are killing them. Rodriguez nodded and immediately activated her communication system. Command, we have confirmation of rescue scenario. 347 trapped, toxic gas exposure. Requesting immediate deployment of all rescue assets. To Veltar, her report sounded like a military commander requesting the deployment of invasion forces. He still could not understand why these heavily armed aliens had brought such overwhelming Military power to respond to a simple mining accident. The truth was that humans simply did not understand the concept of a simple mining accident. On Earth, mining disasters were complex events that required military-level resources to resolve. Cave-ins meant unstable geology that could continue collapsing. Toxic gases meant environmental contamination that could spread. Trapped workers meant time-critical medical emergencies. Requiring advanced life support, the human response was not overwhelming force for conquest. It was overwhelming force applied to the problem of saving lives because humans had learned that anything less than total commitment usually meant people died. Despite every instinct telling him this was a military occupation, Veltar made the decision that would save his people. He gave the humans permission to begin their rescue operations, reasoning that resistance was impossible and the trapped miners would die without help. What happened next defied everything the Xanthari understood about military intervention. Sergeant Rodriguez immediately called for her engineering specialists. But instead of soldiers with weapons, Marines with rescue equipment emerged from the dropships. They carried tools that looked like military hardware but functioned as life-saving devices. To the humans, there was no difference between combat. Engineering and rescue engineering both required the same level of precision and overwhelming capability. "We need complete geological surveys of the collapse area," Rodriguez told her team. "I want to know every unstable formation, every gas pocket, and every structural weakness down to 3 kilometers depth." The human scanning equipment began mapping the underground disaster in detail that amazed the watching Xanthari. Their sensors could see through solid rock and identify individual trapped workers by their biological signatures. The technology was far beyond anything the Xanthari possessed. Colonel Wagner arrived with the main engineering force, and Veltar watched in disbelief as the humans began deploying equipment that seemed impossible. Massive construction mechs, unloaded from transport vessels, followed by orbital bombardment platforms that positioned themselves in the sky above the mine. "What are those weapons platforms for?" Veltar asked nervously. "Precision excavation," Wagner replied through the translator. "We need to create new ventilation shafts to clear the toxic gases. The orbital platforms can vaporize rock formations with pinpoint accuracy without damaging the trapped workers below." Veltar realized that what looked like orbital bombardment weapons were actually surgical tools for reshaping the underground environment. The humans were planning to use military-grade firepower not to destroy, but to save lives. The first demonstration of human rescue capability came when the orbital platforms began firing. Controlled particle beams struck specific rock formations 3 kilometers underground, creating perfectly circular ventilation shafts that bypassed all the collapsed areas. The precision was incredible, each beam missing the trapped workers by mere meters while clearing away thousands of tons of debris. "Ventilation established," Wagner reported, beginning atmospheric processing to clear toxic gases. Atmospheric processors that could terraforming entire planets were deployed to clean the air in the collapsed tunnels. Within minutes, the trapped workers reported that the deadly gases were being replaced with clean, breathable atmosphere. Dr. Chun's medical teams had established their field hospital and were preparing for mass casualties. The facility they created in just hours was more advanced than the colony's primary medical center. They brought equipment for treating everything from radiation poisoning to combat trauma because human emergency medicine assumed the worst possible conditions. "Unknown alien physiology means we prepare for every possibility," Chun explained to Veltar. "Our medical protocols assume we might encounter anything from toxic exposure to severe physical trauma." The breakthrough moment came when the humans began the actual rescue operation. Instead of the careful, slow approach that Xanthari engineers would have used, the human Marines simply blasted new tunnels directly to the trapped workers. Sergeant Rodriguez led her team into the tunnels like they were storming an enemy position. They moved fast and decisively, using controlled explosions to clear obstacles and plasma cutters to slice through twisted metal. Their powered armor protected them from the toxic environment, while their advanced sensors guided them directly to the trapped workers. Contact with first group of survivors, Rodriguez reported. We have 43 workers in tunnel section. 4. They're alive but suffering from gas exposure. The Marines didn't evacuate the workers slowly and carefully. They treated the rescue like a military extraction from hostile territory, moving fast to get everyone out before conditions could worsen. Powered armor suits were fitted to injured Xanthari workers. Medical treatment began immediately, and the entire group was evacuated to the surface in less than 30 minutes. Veltar watched in amazement as worker after worker was brought to the surface alive. The humans worked with mechanical efficiency, but every action was focused on preserving life. Their military precision wasn't used for destruction, it was used to save people as quickly and effectively as possible. Second group extracted, Rodriguez announced. 82 survivors from Tunnel Section 6. Minor injuries responding well to treatment. Dr. Chun's medical teams treated the rescued workers with technology that seemed magical to the Xanthari. Injuries that would have required weeks of recovery were healed in hours. Gas poisoning that should have been fatal was completely reversed. The humans had brought medical capabilities that exceeded Xanthari medicine by centuries. The most impressive operation was the rescue of Tunnel Section 7, where the workers had been completely cut off since the initial collapse. The human engineers didn't try to clear the existing tunnels. They simply created new ones. Colonel Wagner positioned the orbital platforms for a complex operation that involved precisely controlled demolition of the unstable rock formations above the trapped workers. The particle beams carved out a new chamber while simultaneously installing structural supports to prevent further collapse. "This is impossible," whispered Kessara, who had been rescued from one of the earlier groups. "They're restructuring the entire geological formation." Wagner overheard the translation and smiled. Standard disaster response. When we can't work around a problem, we eliminate the problem. The humans weren't just rescuing the trapped workers. They were completely rebuilding the mine safety systems. Emergency egress tunnels were carved through solid rock. Redundant life support systems were installed throughout the complex. Structural reinforcements that exceeded Xanthari engineering standards by orders of magnitude were put in place. The final group is in the deepest section, Rodriguez reported. 37 workers, but the toxic gas concentration is lethal even with our atmosphere processors. This was the most challenging rescue because the workers were unconscious from gas exposure and could not help with their own evacuation. The Marines had to go in wearing full environmental suits and extract each worker individually. Rodriguez led her team 3 kilometers underground through passages filled with deadly gas. They moved like a military unit because they were a military unit, but their mission was purely humanitarian. Each unconscious worker was fitted with life support equipment and carried to safety. "All workers extracted," Rodriguez finally announced. 347 survivors, various degrees of gas exposure and minor injuries, no fatalities. The rescue operation that the Xanthari had thought would take weeks, if it was possible at all, had been completed in less than 8 hours. Every single trapped worker was alive and receiving medical treatment that was healing them faster than anyone had imagined possible. Veltar looked around at the transformed disaster site, where there had been a collapsed mine threatening hundreds of lives. There was now a modern facility with safety systems that would prevent such accidents from ever happening again. The humans had not just solved the immediate problem, they had eliminated the possibility of it recurring. "Why did you bring so much capability for a simple rescue?" he asked Colonel Wagner. Wagner looked puzzled by the question. "Simple rescue? You had 347 people trapped 3 kilometers underground in a toxic environment with unstable geology. That's a complex multi-phase operation requiring everything we brought." For the first time, Veltar began to understand that the humans didn't see their response as overwhelming force. They saw it as appropriate force for the complexity of the problem they had been asked to solve. As the last of the rescued workers received treatment in the human medical facility, Admiral Blake arrived planetside to oversee the conclusion of the rescue operation. Veltar had requested a meeting with the human commander, hoping to understand why they had responded to a simple distress call with what appeared to be a military invasion. Blake stepped off her transport wearing standard military uniform, but her demeanor was calm and professional rather than threatening. She was accompanied by a small diplomatic team, including a xenologist named Dr. Karen White, who specialized in first contact protocols. "Administrator Veltar," Blake said through the improved translation system, "I understand you have questions about our response to your emergency." Veltar gestured toward the massive human fleet visible in the sky above them. "Your ships carry enough weapons to destroy our entire world. Your rescue teams moved like military forces. We sent a request for medical assistance and you responded with what looked like an invasion fleet." Blake appeared genuinely confused by his concern. "You sent a distress signal indicating that hundreds of your people were trapped in a life-threatening situation. This is exactly how we respond to such emergencies." "But why so many weapons? Why such overwhelming military force?" Dr. White stepped forward to explain. "Perhaps it would help if we told you about Earth, our home world. Earth is what we call a death world, a planet where the environment itself is constantly trying to kill everything that lives there." She activated a holographic display showing images of Earth's natural disasters. Hurricanes that could level entire cities, earthquakes that split the ground open for hundreds of kilometers, volcanic eruptions that buried whole regions in ash, tsunamis that swept away everything for kilometers inland. "On Earth, when disaster strikes, it's never simple," White continued. "A hurricane brings flooding, infrastructure collapse, disease outbreaks, and civil unrest. An earthquake triggers fires, toxic spills, dam failures, and refugee crises. Volcanic eruption causes global climate disruption, crop failures, and mass starvation." Veltar studied the images of Earth's devastating natural disasters. "Your entire planet experiences disasters like this regularly." "Every few days somewhere on Earth," Blake confirmed. "Our emergency response protocols assume that any disaster is potentially a complex multi-phase crisis, requiring military-level resources to resolve properly." Captain Foster joined the group and added his perspective. "When we received your distress call mentioning trapped workers and toxic environment, we didn't see a simple mining accident. We saw potential chemical warfare, possible hostile occupation, or a disaster so severe it overwhelmed your own response capabilities." "Chemical warfare?" Veltar asked in surprise. "The mention of toxic gases in your message," Foster explained. "On Earth, toxic gas accidents usually involve industrial disasters, chemical weapons, or environmental contamination that can spread over large areas. We brought decontamination equipment and atmospheric processing capability because we've learned that toxic situations usually get worse before they get better." Dr. Chen approached the group, having finished treating the last of the injured workers. "From a medical perspective, your people's physiology is remarkably similar to several Earth species we've worked with. But we brought our full xenobiology capability because we had no way to know what we might encounter." "Your medical technology is centuries ahead of ours," Veltar observed. "It's designed for worst-case scenarios," Chen replied. "Human medicine developed to treat everything from shark attacks to avalanche victims to radiation poisoning from nuclear accidents. When we don't know what medical challenges we'll face, we prepare for everything." Colonel Wagner walked over from the mine site where his teams were finishing the installation of the new safety systems. "The structural improvements we made are standard for human mining operations. On Earth, any excavation has to withstand earthquakes, volcanic activity, and extreme weather conditions. You rebuilt our entire mine as if it needed to survive planetary disasters," Veltar said. "That's the only way we know how to build things," Wagner replied. "If you're going to build something, build it to last through anything." The cultural revelation was becoming clear to Veltar. The humans hadn't brought overwhelming force because they were aggressive or militaristic. They had brought overwhelming force because their environment had taught them that anything less than total preparation usually meant people died. Admiral Blake sat down with Veltar to explain the human perspective more fully. "On Earth we have A saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. When someone calls for help, we bring everything we might possibly need because we rarely get a second chance. But surely you must realize that your response appears threatening to other species. Blake considered this. We're still learning about interacting with other species. Most humans assume that anyone in distress would want us to bring our maximum capability to help them. We see bringing insufficient aid when we could bring more as callous and irresponsible. Dr. White added, Earth's environment shaped our entire culture around the idea that when someone needs help, you give them everything you have. Holding back resources when lives are at stake goes against our fundamental values. Veltar began to understand that what he had seen as military aggression was actually the human expression of caring. They had brought weapons not to conquer, but to clear obstacles. They had brought overwhelming force not to intimidate, but to ensure success. They had responded like a military operation because saving lives was serious business that deserved their best effort. What happens now? Veltar asked. We establish formal diplomatic relations, Blake replied. The Xanthari are now friends of humanity.